Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this hour of World News. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. At the Arab-Islamic Summit, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman condemns Israel's actions in Gaza, says Israel is committing genocide. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says developing nations must not leave Baku empty-handed. Plus, the newly appointed Haitian Prime Minister pledges to stop spiraling gang violence in the country. Let's begin the world today. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has condemned Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide and some of the harshest public criticism of the country by a Saudi official since the start of the year. Speaking at a summit of Muslim and Arab leaders in Riyadh, the prince also criticized Israeli attacks on Lebanon and Iran. Israel has vehemently denied its forces are committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. In a sign of improving ties between rivals Riyadh and Tehran, Prince Mohammed also warned Israel against launching attacks on Iranian soil. Saudi's de facto leader was joined by other leaders present in calling for a total Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank and from Gaza. Let's bring in the VOA's Edward Uranian, who's monitoring the meeting from Cairo, Egypt. Edward, great to see you. It is interesting Saudi Arabia is holding this meeting 1 year since Israel's operation in Gaza and now in Lebanon. Can you glean from the discussions what the real purpose of the meeting is about?
Well, Amarat, mostly guesstimation, but I mean, we're all guesstimating, that's the right word. I would say probably it's mostly for Arab public opinion, Arab and Islamic public opinion, since it was both the Arab League and the Islamic Conference organization that were hosting this. Also, I've seen other Arab commentators suggesting that it has something to do with President Trump's election and that the Arab leaders wanted to signal to President Trump what their positions were, but most of their positions were not anything that would fly in an international arena. So I think it's more likely that they were aiming at their own public opinions.
It does kind of seem like that. I mean, Trump's presidency announced last week did rattle a few nations, and there are lots of expectations from the Middle East about the new U.S. president stopping the war in Israel. But, you know, you're seeing this partnership between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the incoming U.S. administration. The Israeli Prime Minister did say he's spoken to Trump about 3 times already. And I'm sure that, you know, discussions have come up about the war in Gaza and the operations in Lebanon. What could be Saudi Arabia's fear about what U.S. influence on Israel could do as regards this operation in Gaza and in Lebanon?
Well, honestly, I don't see anything in Saudi interests that would be harmed by Israel taking out Hezbollah in Lebanon or taking out Hamas in Gaza, as a matter of fact. I think it's more likely that Prime Minister, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is worried about the succession to his father, and he's trying to show his own public opinion that he's a strong leader and he's taking action, while at the same time trying to appease the incoming president, President Trump, behind the scenes, because he needs ostensibly needs American approval for him to become king. I mean, that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but I think it's really the truth, because there were 2 rivals at the time. There were 2 crown princes. There was the Mohammed bin Nayef, who was was supported more by other states, not necessarily the U.S. or the Trump administration. And Trump went and supported Mohammed bin Salman. So I think he needs Trump's support to become crown prince, to become king when his father dies.
Very interesting analysis and approach. But the criticism for Israel is no surprise. But then Israel and Saudi Arabia were this close to signing an agreement last year before the Hamas attacks. How would you describe relations between the two now?
Probably not as hostile as the rhetoric you were hearing at the summit, because the Hezbollah group is not a Saudi ally, and the Saudi allies on the ground in Lebanon were pushed aside by Hezbollah. So Saudi Arabia has a lot to gain by Israel taking out Hezbollah, if that's ultimately what's going to happen. And its rapprochement with Iran is probably overblown, because the new government in Iran really doesn't control the foreign policy levers, as does the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and relations with him are not very good. And there's a large Shiite population in Saudi Arabia in the eastern province, and I think probably Mohammed bin Salman doesn't want to antagonize them, while at the same time knowing that he's really not going to have any good relations with them anyway.
And the Saudi government, Prince bin Salman, has also warned Israel against launching attacks on Iranian soil. I really haven't seen much as regards relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but why would this be important to the Saudi kingdom?
It probably wouldn't. I suspect that's just another thing people say in public, which really don't reflect their real views, because I think if Israel launched an attack against Iran and, for instance, took out the Islamic Republic and pulled down the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, they would secretly be applauding. But on the surface of it, they really can't do that. So I think what they say in public is one thing, and what they think in private is another thing.
Edward, the blame then turns to the international organizations such as the United Nations for failing to stop the war in Gaza. Saudi Arabia is also part of the international community. What has it done regarding the situation in the Middle East in recent times?
Well, I think what most of the Arab countries have done has been to put out videos saying they're aiding the Palestinians on the ground in Gaza with aid, and to say they're sending aid to the Lebanese on the ground, which they are. That's true, but concretely, they really aren't doing very much, and they really can't do very much, because the levers of power at the UN are such that if you have important countries that oppose a measure that they're proposing, it won't fly. So, and they know that the balance of power is not going to change, especially now that President Trump is in power in America, or almost in power. So I think what they're saying is mostly for their own public opinion.
Let's talk about the African countries present at the meeting. I know that Nigerian President Bola Tinubu was there. He's on his way back to Nigeria. We also had representatives from Sudan, and I think I did see the Chadian president also at the meeting. What stake do they have in this conversation?
Probably not much at all, other than the fact that, as the Arab states are doing, they're aiming at their own public opinion. You'd know that better than I would. I'm just guessing. As for Nigeria, but for Sudan is a different situation, and Chad as well, because Sudan, the Sudanese leader, the Sudanese general, Burhan, is dependent on Saudi support and dependent on a lot of other Arab countries for support in his conflict with the rapid support forces on the ground in Sudan. So he's probably was probably having a lot of behind-the-scenes conversations with many of these leaders, especially Mohammed bin Salman, to sound out what their positions were with respect to the Sudanese conflict, much more than the Gaza situation or Lebanon.
The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was also at this meeting. He has dabbled a little bit into the crisis in the Middle East, especially Israel's war on Gaza. He suggested a two-state solution. He's also suggested a ceasefire. So what new What new approach could he bring to this conversation? I mean, is he able to convince other Arab leaders to see things from his perspective?
Once again, I think he's probably playing to Egyptian public opinion. I don't really know what his own honest opinion is with respect to what's going on in Gaza or what the Israelis are doing, because he's always had good relations with the Israelis when he was the intelligence chief in the Sinai, and his intelligence people have had good relations with the Israelis. And they don't like Hamas, even though they negotiate with them and invite them to Cairo. And none of the Arab leaders like Hamas. So despite the fact that they're giving them their sympathy verbally, I really don't think any of them support them. And if they were taken out by the Israelis, there wouldn't be any love lost. But at the same time, a lot of innocent civilians have been killed. And that's what they want to signal to their public opinion.
I'm glad you raised that, Edward, because I really haven't seen any outright condemnation by any of these Arab countries for Hamas. Really haven't seen any condemnation for what they did on October 7. On October 7. Neither have I seen any condemnation for their attacks on Israel as well. But there's been a lot of condemnation for the Israeli government as regards its operations in Gaza. They always highlight the number of people killed, but they never ever highlight Hamas's doctrine and Hamas's goal with Israel, which is to eventually annihilate a whole nation.
Yeah, I think this is part of the problem, and the basically Arab public opinion supports Hamas. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. And so these leaders have to be very careful about how they criticize Hamas, because they know public opinion, especially now with all the casualties on the ground, is in favor of Hamas, even though they're not. So they have to play it carefully.
I guess you also have to be careful, Edward. Thank you for taking the risk of talking to us about this meeting.
You're welcome, Amarachi. Thank you for having me.
The residents in northern Lebanon are still searching through the rubble for survivors and their belongings after a deadly Israeli airstrike killed at least 14 people and left some 15 others injured. According to officials, the strike hit a residential building which also housed Syrian refugees. Authorities believe some people might still be trapped under the rubble. Much earlier, the Israeli military said its forces targeted a military structure with a terrorist inside based on precise intelligence, taking measures to minimize collateral damage, and in the reports of uninvolved casualties were exaggerated. We'll also hear from the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar that there have been progress in talks about a Lebanon ceasefire and that Russia could play a part by stopping Hezbollah rearming via Syria, although the Iranian-backed group says it's not received any new truce proposals. Pummeled by Israel's offensive, Hezbollah said diplomatic contacts were underway involving its backers in Tehran, Washington and Moscow, whilst reiterating its readiness to fight on, saying it had enough weapons for a long war. Mr. Sa'ar said the war against Hezbollah is not yet over. The main challenge facing any ceasefire deal, he says, will be enforcement, though there's been certain progress in talks.
We are working with the Americans on the issue. There is progress, and we will be ready to be there if we will know, first of all, that Hezbollah is not on our border, is north and to the Litani River, and that Hezbollah will not be able to arm again with new weapon systems and so on that will come from Syria, from the sea, from the airport. Anyway, the main challenge eventually will be to enforce what will be agreed. One, on the issue of getting them not near the border, northern to the Litani River, and secondly, not let them build again their forces they use in order to attack us.
And the Israeli President Isaac Herzog has congratulated U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on his electoral victory, calling him a champion of peace and cooperation. President Herzog was speaking at a session of the Jewish Federations in North America in Washington, D.C. He wished the Republican president-elect every success in leading Israel and the Middle East towards a future of security and prosperity. He also thanked President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris for their solidarity and support for the Israeli people.
Dear friends, as President of the State of Israel, I congratulate President-elect Donald Trump, a champion of peace and cooperation and a great friend of Israel. In our conversation just a few days ago, following his election, we spoke of the urgent need to bring our hostages back home. President Trump reiterated his love for Israel. I thanked him for his friendship and wished him every success in leading Israel and the Middle East towards a future of security and prosperity. I take this opportunity to express gratitude and admiration to the 46th President of the United States, my dear friend Joe Biden, for his lifetime of friendship with Israel and devotion to the Jewish people. The President's steadfast support from the very beginning of the war was a moving display of leadership and kinship that Israel will never forget. I look forward to meeting with President Biden tomorrow and thanking him on behalf of the state and people of Israel for standing by us in our most difficult moment. I also thank Vice President Kamala Harris for actively voicing her solidarity with the Israeli people.
We saw the Israeli president congratulating U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. But speaking of the U.S. President-elect, has been putting together his lineup for the new administration. Some familiar faces will be making into the administration after all. One of them is Senator Marco Rubio, who's been selected to be Secretary of State. Rubio will become the first Latino to serve as America's top diplomat. He has in the past years advocated for a muscular foreign policy with respect to America's geopolitical foes, including China, Iran, and Cuba. Now, over the last several years, has however softened some of his stance to align more closely with Trump's views. The new administration will confront a world more volatile and dangerous than it was when Trump took office in 2017, with wars raging in Ukraine and the Middle East, and China aligning itself more closely with U.S. foes, Russia and Iran. The 53-year-old Rubio has said in recent interviews that Ukraine needs to seek a negotiated settlement with Russia rather than focus on regaining all territory that Russia has taken in the last decade. He's also one of the 15 Republican senators to vote against a $95 billion military aid package for Ukraine passed in April. Now, by selecting Rubio for a key policy role, Trump may help consolidate gains among Latinos and make clear that they have a place at the highest levels of his administration. Joining Trump's team will also be Republican Representative Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. Waltz, a Trump loyalist, serves in the National Guard as a colonel. He has criticized Chinese activity in the Asia-Pacific and voiced the need for the United States to be ready for a potential conflict in the region. The role of the National Security Advisor is a powerful one, which does not require Senate confirmation. Waltz will be responsible for briefing Trump on key national security issues and coordinating with different agencies. While slamming the Biden administration for a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, Waltz has publicly praised Trump's foreign policy views.
Get anyone to ask that was involved with this, and I've talked to a number, is why did the Taliban pick those spots?
Also making the lineup for next year is South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. She's been picked to serve as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Noem, once seen as a possible running mate for the Republican Trump, is currently serving her second four-year term as South Dakota's governor after a landslide re-election victory in 2022. She rose to national prominence after refusing to impose a statewide mask mandate during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Noem has had a turbulent few months politically this year. She faced widespread backlash in April when she wrote a memoir that she shot to death an untrainable dog that she hated on her family farm, following which some Trump advisors said they believed Noem's stock had fallen in the former president's eyes at a time when she was still a VP contender. Both Trump's campaign and Noem's office did not respond to requests for comments outside regular business hours. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for everything from border protection and immigration to disaster response and the U.S. Secret Service.
Okay. Hold it, please.
I want to bring in now national security risk strategist and former British police officer Vince Onyekwelu. He joins us from Abuja. Vince, it's great to have you on the program. It's always great to have you whenever we have you. Let's talk about this lineup that the new president of the United States, who will be taking over in January, has put together. The position of Homeland Security Secretary is a sensitive one in today's America, or in the world we live in now. How important is it that whoever is picked for this role is one who understands the responsibility required?
Fantastic question. Obviously, it's a role that encompasses the Coastal Guard in the USA. It also encompasses the customs, immigration, border enforcement, and even those that want to become US citizens have to pass through the same Homeland Security department. So it's a very important department, especially for a president-elect that campaigned that there's going to be a massive haul or overhaul on the issue of open borders, because Democrats did a lot of work with their open border systems. And obviously, as a human being who believes in border control, I believe that Mr. Trump has every right to checkmate or look after the national borders of his country. You know, the idea of having an open border, it's one that somebody like me is not in support of, to avoid criminals or terrorists coming through the borders. So I think the nominee picked up is a loyalist, and obviously as a loyalist, she's happy to work with Mr. Trump about making sure that undocumented illegal migrants do not have a right for children they give birth in the USA for them to become citizens, because there's a lot of issues about open borders in the USA where people from all parts of the world just goes across the border. Number two, obviously, the presence of the National Border Security in the USA resonates with people that believe that every country has a right to protect its national borders. So I think Madam Noem is a loyalist, and I believe from the first day one in January, we have to see a massive protection of national borders of the USA, which I totally support.
Yes, so a lot of U.S. allies are expecting this, a change in national, in immigration laws. Trump has said that from day one, he will clamp down on the border, which is why he has appointed border czar Homan, beg your pardon, to oversee this. For many people who are looking at the U.S., for some direction, I guess, as regards how it will treat those who are irregular migrants into the country, especially those who are still stuck at the border, trying to make their way inside in the southern Mexican border with the U.S., and for those who might be also coming in and overstaying their visas, they say there must be some humanity put into this as the U.S. seeks to reestablish itself as a strong nation, as a strong ally to most of these countries. How do you think that she can do this? How can she balance, representing America as a strong figure and then still maintaining the humanity in the work that she has to do?
Yeah, number one, if you look at the structure Mr. Trump has in place, the Secretary of State happens to be somebody from the Latino background. And then you now talk about the border czar that was appointed some days ago, and now the possibility of Madame Nerm coming in as the Homeland Security Secretary. You can see the structure that even though you want to have a humanity touch on border security, but no matured, no sensible nation will allow its national borders to be abused the way the national borders of the USA or even our dear country, Nigeria's national borders has been abused. So I think there's importance to put a humanity touch there into that. However, it means that those coming across the borders have to go through proper processing. No longer you're coming. Do you know it got so bad that in the USA, illegal undocumented migrants enters a state, and they even understand the state laws that say if you see a property that nobody has lived in for 3 or 6 months, you have a right to break into the door and even take possession of that property. We've had cases of where somebody who came to check her parents' property that they died some time ago, and she saw migrants, and they even beat her up, almost killed her. So I think this wonderful nominees in place to Mr. Trump is a reassurance to the American people that their national borders has to be respected. Still, they have to put a human face to it, not to abuse migrants, to put them through the asylum process or to allow them to go through the normal process of being documented. For the act of coming in illegally with courage, with bare chest, that you can come to the USA just like they come into Nigeria, that needs to be checkmated, and I support Trump in that policy.
Yeah, I find Dance, she has to coordinate with this, especially as America seems so isolationist to many of its partners. And thankfully, we've seen, more women appointed to this administration. I mean, the first lineups, we've counted 3 women already. But the Trump administration has also come under, when Trump was first president, he did come under lots of criticism for America's isolationist policies. That's because the former president, who's returning, did threaten to pull the U.S. out of NATO over unpaid dues by European countries. He did pull the U.S. out of the WHO, but now he's coming back. You think he can smooth over those relations with European allies, some of whom he also criticized while he was in office?
Growing up in Europe, I can tell you totally, there are so many shenanigans going up in military security in Europe. Do you know that countries like Liechtenstein, a country like Iceland, do not have a national military anymore? They don't have a national army anymore. Iceland, for example, totally relies on NATO. Liechtenstein totally relies on NATO. Monaco totally relies on NATO. Vatican City totally relies on NATO. Even South American countries like Costa Rica relies on this kind of support. And I ask you the question, how come European nations rely so much on NATO and they're not willing to bring enough weight financially to support NATO activities? So I think Trump is not just a president, he's not just a leader, he's also a smart businessman. You need to be able to pull in your financial powers to support NATO. You don't just want to be a recipient of NATO military support, but you're not willing to bring enough financial support to back NATO financially. So I think as a smart leader, as a businessman who understands profit and loss account, it's very smart that NATO countries need to bring their financial wherewithal to support NATO operations, not just be willing to benefit from the military operations of NATO. Nations like Liechtenstein and the Iceland I mentioned obviously have to bring the financial powers, because when they don't fund their military, that means they're saving so much money to support their national health, their national education system, whereas America is bringing their own money, cutting down on housing, cutting down on job creations to support European nations. I think Europe should be able to support their national securities, not just relying on USA. So I think European leaders, like somebody like Mr. Orban of Hungary, is about to, in next 2 days, there will be a 50 European nation summit in Budapest. And one of the topics is about discussion about national security in Europe. And other leaders like Meloni of Italy All these people have to bring their financial powers. Our Vice Chancellor Olaf of Germany is also willing, but is France willing? And what of the British Prime Minister Starmer, who is obviously not so much in support of Trump? Are they willing to bring in the financial power? So I support Trump's with his foreign policies regards to NATO financial sponsorship.
Yeah, and I know the European countries are already gathering together and discussing their approach to Donald Trump taking over in January. But the world we live in now, there is growing insecurity. It's not just Hamas and Hezbollah in the Middle East. It's also the discovery of new terrorist organizations like even here in Nigeria. What do you think leaders are not doing enough of to get rid of these groups?
I think a lot of leaders are playing emotional games. A lot of leaders are playing what I call the two-legged dance. When they try to dance on they speak from the two sides of their mouth. I tell you, for example, Trump has an opportunity to de-escalate the Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah war, because the war has come to a point that there's a need for de-escalation, no longer escalation. Obviously, unfortunately, I'm not sure that Hamas, for example, can currently argue from a point of strength, because they have been significantly weakened in Gaza, in Jabalia refugee camp, and all other North and South Gaza. Even in Rafah, they've been significantly de-escalated militarily. So I think Hezbollah still have a right to probably argue from a point of strength. However, the bottom line is, just like our dear president that was talking about the importance of ending the war in Gaza, I support the end of war in Gaza. However, first and foremost, I support the immediate and the unconditional release of all hostages. You cannot be asking for the war in Gaza to end, whereas fathers, mothers, daughters, children, babies are being held hostage, and you're talking about a war needs to end immediately. What of the hostages? They are human beings. So I think unconditional release of the hostages and unconditional end of the war in Gaza is supported. Now, you come across to what's happening between Israel and Hezbollah. But many people don't know that the strength of Hezbollah lies in Iran. People understand that in Nigeria, we see the impact of Iran in Zaria, Kaduna area, where you talk about the Shiites. Iran is a Shiite nation. Lebanon is a Shiite nation. Hamas is a Shia military. Hezbollah is a Shia military. Syria is a Shia military. Yemen is a Shiite military. And what you have in Zaria in Kaduna are also Shia militaries. So when you talk about the new terrorist organization that just came into Nigeria, the question is, are they Shia also? Because if they are Shia, then that is the influence of Iran also coming into Nigeria. So Mr. Trump has to be very strong about managing the issue of Iran and the role they play in world terror of sponsoring Hezbollah or Hamas, or even potentially the Shiites in Zaria, Kaduna. Thank you.
Vince Onyekwelu, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I know we have to still dissect these issues, especially as regards global security. Thank you again for coming on The World Today.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
A sense of the war in Ukraine now, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says his military's ongoing incursion into Russia's Kursk region is now holding 50,000 Russian troops in the area. This was revealed in his daily address to the nation. President Zelensky said the operation is reducing Moscow's ability to attack inside Ukraine itself. The president has long cited this as a goal of the offensive, despite skepticism from Western allies. According to the Institute for Study of War, a U.S. nonprofit, Russia had 11,000 troops in Kursk when Ukraine began its shock incursion in early August. The New York Times suggests that Moscow has achieved its troop buildup in Kursk without any need to pull its soldiers out of Ukraine.
Чим далі можуть бити наявні у нас ракети, наші дрони, тим менше реально. Ставку. Кілька питань було. Основне – захист нашого неба. Є непогані результати у зміцненні ППО.
At least 35 people have been killed, 43 more injured after a man drove into a crowd of people exercising at a stadium in Zhuhai, southern China, on Monday. A 62-year-old male driver identified as Mr. Fan drove his SUV through a barrier at Zhuhai Sports Center in what local police say was a serious and vicious attack. Chinese media did report that many elderly people, as well as teenagers and children, were among the injured. Police say the driver was arrested as he tried to flee and is in a coma from self-inflicted wounds. Now, most of the videos of the incident shared by witnesses have been scrubbed off China's social media by this morning, but some footage still online showed dozens of people lying on the ground and being attended to by paramedics and bystanders. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has told world leaders at the COP29 summit to pay up to prevent climate-led humanitarian disasters, saying time is running out to limit a destructive rise in global temperatures. Nearly 200 nations have gathered at the annual UN Climate Summit in Baku, Azerbaijan, focused this year on raising hundreds of billions of dollars to fund a global transition to cleaner energy sources and amid the climate damage caused by carbon emissions.
President, the sound you hear is the ticking clock. We are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And time is not on our side. In our global economy, supply chain shocks raise costs everywhere. Decimated harvests push up food prices everywhere. Destroyed homes increase insurance premiums everywhere. And this is a story of avoidable injustice. The rich cause the problem, the poor pay the highest price. So doubling down on fossil fuels is absurd. The clean energy revolution is here. No group, no business, and no government can stop it. But you can and must ensure it is fair and fast enough to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. COP29 must tear down the walls of climate finance. Developing countries must not leave Baku empty-handed. A deal is a must, and I'm confident it will be reached. We need a new finance goal that meets the moment.
On Monday, the U.S. climate envoy John Podesta took a bold stance against the incoming Trump administration, saying Donald Trump's election victory last week was disappointing to climate advocates, but that work to combat global warming would continue in the U.S. He said this during a news conference. He also talked about China, saying the country has an obligation to develop a plan to cut emissions aligned with the 2015 Paris Agreement goal to limit planetary warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has resigned days after damning reports into a prolific child abuser associated with the Church of England. In his resignation statement, Justin Welby says the report exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smith. He says when he was told in 2013 that police had been notified, in his words, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. Smith was not brought to justice before his death in South Africa in 2018. A nationwide consultation will now be held asking people in and outside the Church of England what they want from the next Archbishop. It is expected to take several months. No one applies for the role. Those chosen for interview do not have to be from the Church of England, and they do not have to be bishops, although they are likely to be. Citizens of the United Kingdom are still reacting to Kemi Badenoch, a Brit with Nigerian heritage, of becoming the Conservative Party leader. Now, not everyone in the UK is celebrating. Some fear that Badenoch, who was born in London to Nigerian parents but lived in Lagos until she was 16, will undermine progress towards racial equality. A defender of meritocracy, Badenoch has said she prefers not to focus on her race, arguing she would like the color of her skin to be no more significant than the color of her hair or eyes.
When someone like me came to this country, I had to believe, the kind of information given to us that, oh, Conservative is a party for the whites. So that gave us a kind of impression that, oh, we can never vote for Conservative. But now that we're able to see that someone from our own continent, you understand, was able to get to that level of becoming the leader of Conservative is a remarkable achievement, very remarkable. It gives us a hope, it gives our children hopes.
We really want a good quality leader who know what they are doing, not because of the color or anything, but I think their policy matter.
To be honest, it's good for women to be the first black woman to be a leader of the Conservative Party. But I do think she doesn't really represent what she thinks she represents, really. So yeah, I haven't really given it thought, but that's all I can say with that. I don't think she actually represents the people that she says she represents for. I feel like she's in her place where she's in the middle class, high class sector, so I do not think she represents for the youth or the upcoming youth and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's some inspiration for everyone, for the females out there as well, because I think, in this country, I think equality is something. To be fair, it's not really like that in Nigeria. It's so hard to see a female, being elected as, head of a pie or something back home. So, I think it's really a good deal, yeah. So I'm really proud of her, yeah. And I think she's gonna be an inspiration to a lot of people. She's an inspiration to me as well, because a black woman doing something like that, definitely she's gonna be an inspiration to everyone.
Well, in Mauritius, hundreds of people have taken to the streets of Port Louis celebrating the win of former Prime Minister Navin Ramgoolam and his Alliance for Change coalition in a landslide victory at the polls. Opposition supporters waved Mauritian flags, blowing vuvuzelas and lighting firecrackers as police officers watched from the sidelines. According to the latest figures, the incumbent minister Pravind Jugnauth and his coalition were denied a second 5-year term after failing to win any of the 62 seats in parliament. Their election campaign was mired by a phone tapping scandal which saw recordings of public figures published online. Jugnauth then sparked criticism after issuing a social media ban following the leaks. The ruling was reversed within 24 hours. A journalist detained in Eritrean prison without trial for 23 years has won a Swedish Human Rights Prize for his commitment to freedom of expression. The foundation behind the award said in a statement that Dawit Isaak was given the Edelstam Prize for his exceptional courage. Dawit, who holds dual Eritrean-Swedish citizenship, was one of the founders of Setit, Eritrea's first independent newspaper. He was detained in 2001 after his paper published letters demanding democratic reforms. Over the years, the Eritrean government has provided no information on his whereabouts or his health. The Edelstam Prize will be presented on November 19 in Stockholm. Dawit's daughter, Bethlehem Isaak, will accept the prize on his behalf as he remains imprisoned in Eritrea. Haiti's new Prime Minister Alex Didier Fils-Aimé took office on Monday as the nation's new interim leader, pledging to improve security even as armed gangs flexed their muscles with a brazen attack on a commercial plane attempted to land in the capital. Fils-Aimé was appointed by the Caribbean Island Nations Transitional Council over the weekend to succeed Gary Coney, who served only 6 months. The council and the new prime minister are tasked with preparing for long-delayed elections amid a deep political and social crisis marked by growing hunger and frequent episodes of raging gangland violence. Back to Africa now. From ripped jeans to recycled dreams, the Kenyan company is giving life to textile waste in Nairobi. The Africa Collect Textiles uses carded clothes to create other products. Let's take a look.
Africa collects textiles in recycling clothes and footwear waste and transforming them into new goods to promote sustainable fashion while reducing carbon emissions in both Nairobi and Lagos. In Nairobi, the ACT employees sort through donations, cutting old textiles and sewing together brand new products including shirts, toys, bags and carpets.
ACT is a textile recycling company in Lagos and Nairobi. We have set up collection bins in high traffic areas like malls and universities where consumers like you and I can take our used clothes to have them disposed of ethically.
Once the donations are collected, the clothes are separated between non-wearables and wearables. Wearable items are then used in a reseller program where they're sold at lower prices to be used more outside Nairobi.
Once we have collected the clothes, we bring them over to our headquarters for sorting. So we separate non-wearables and wearables. Non-wearables are clothes that have been worn out, that are really old, and then wearables are clothes that are still in good condition. So we process our wearables by creating a reseller program, which helps us increase circularity of these clothes outside Nairobi. So meaning we create mini bells cheaper than the bells that are gotten from Gikomba, and then we sell them to women outside Nairobi.
Naina notes that ACT's initiative offers a zero-waste alternative to conventional textile disposal methods, which produce more carbon emissions.
Compared to traditional skills of disposing of our used clothes, like either the most common one is passing them on to relatives or children's homes, whereby they end up in landfills and they are just burnt. That is more carbon emissions produced, and that is more resources like our land that are underutilized. We provide a solution that is zero waste, less or no carbon emissions produced, but also gives us an opportunity to create more green jobs for people both in Kenya and Nigeria and hopefully the whole of Africa.
Africa reportedly receives a significant amount of world's discarded textiles. The absence of adequate waste management systems in many African nations often leads to the burning of these garments in landfills, which experts warn can have detrimental effects on the environment.
And as we end the program, U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on Monday honored U.S. military veterans in their first joint appearance since Harris lost the Democrats' presidential bid to Republican Donald Trump in last week's election. Biden laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery alongside Harris in a solemn ceremony as the national anthem and taps echoed through the grounds on a bright autumn morning. The two top Democrats stood stone-faced side by side at the event as Biden laid a wreath and made the sign of the cross.
Four presidents faced a decision after we had gotten bin Laden whether to end our longest war in history in Afghanistan. I was determined not to leave it to the fifth. This is the moment. This is the moment to come together as a nation, to keep faith in each other. The world is dependent on each of you and all of us, all of you, to keep honoring the women and the men and the families who've borne the battle, to keep protecting everything they fought for, to keep striving to heal our nation's wounds, to keep perfecting our union. We're the only nation in the world built on an idea. Every other nation is based on things like geography, ethnicity, religion. But we're the only nation, the only in the world, built on an idea. And that idea is we're all created equal, deserve to be created equal throughout our lives. We haven't lived up to it every time, but we've never walked away from it. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And today, standing together to honor those Americans who have dared all, risked all, and given all to our nation, I must say clearly, we never will give up. God bless our veterans and their families. And may God protect our troops today and always.
That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.